So you may have heard of these ancient granite vases coming out of ancient Egypt. They have come under a lot of speculation recently, especially from Uncharted X on YouTube. Himself and an engineer called Chris Dunn proposed there must have been a lost technology that made these granite vases, and we will touch on this as the video goes on. But not only this, you'll come to realise that they have found a mathematical equation that correlates to almost every single one of these granite vases. And this mathematical knowledge would predate the Greeks and effectively every civilization that we know that has used mathematics. These granite vases are believed to have been at least 5,000 years old. So the question is, who made them and how did they make them? And is this mathematical equation that's been found merely a coincidence, or is it genuine? And this is something we're going to look at as the video goes on. But first, we need to look at what the accepted theory is of who made these. So the accepted theory is that they were built in the pre-dynastic times, dating to around 5000 BC, and they're going into the Old Kingdom between 2800 to 2100 BC. But what's interesting is that the earlier works appear to be the most stunning and the most precise, which is where we get the theory of a lost technology or a lost civilization, if you will. People such as Graham Hancock have proposed this, and it's no wonder when we get to look at how amazing these vases are. But not only this, but the oldest of the vases that we have found so far was in a burial site in Sudan, which unfortunately is now underwater. This burial site is believed to have been around 14,000 years old. So now you've got to ask yourself, how did it get there? And not only this, but it was found with replicas that were made of clay. So the question is, if this is 14,000 years old, why are there replicas already being made? Especially out of clay as well. Why would you not continue to make it out of granite? Just for the sake of this video, we're just going to look at the granite vases and the possibility of a lost mathematical knowledge and lost technology. And it's important to note that while most of these vases were made out of granite, some are also made out of diorite. We have ones in Egypt that are made out of a softer material, namely alabaster, and we do see this on Egyptian pictures, Egyptian hieroglyphs all over Egypt, obviously, because it's in Egypt. But the accepted method on how these were made were by using stone tools, abrasives, copper chisels, bow saws, which, if given the fitted timeline, would fit appropriately. And it does bring it into a question, how would they have made such possible vases with such precision with tools that were much softer? One way this is explained is by coating the copper with an abrasive, such as quartz, which we find in sand, which, as we know, sand is all over Egypt. There is absolutely no denying that this would be able to cut through granite. But the problem is the precision on some of these vases, it's not explained with just copper and sand. And some of them are so hollow and so thin that you can actually shine a light through them. It's almost as if they had a purpose to be this thin rather than it just being a vase. And something to understand is that if you want to make something that's perfectly circular, first you need to have an object that's fixed in place. And then you have to have a blade that comes along in a certain sequence, in a certain numerical coding, should we say, such as a CNC machine. And sometimes you could be using 4 or even 5 axes when cutting. Now when it comes to granite, when we look at the Mohs scale, which is effectively how hard something is, so higher the number, 10, that's very hard, and 1, very soft. When we look at granite, it's 7. And the thing is, when it comes to cutting granite so precisely, there's no room for a shaky hand, so there's next to no room for human error. And with these vases to be so precise, you have to ask yourself, could you do this with modern technology? And the truth is, yes, but it would be so difficult to reach this precision. In fact, we have tried to make these type of vases, and we were about 5 times less accurate. Something you have to understand is the precision of these granite vases is to within 0.003 of an inch. And these vases that we made in the modern times were made out of marble, and they were 5 times less precise than the granite vases. So again, you've got to ask yourself, why can't we do it in a softer material, but they could do it in a harder material using soft copper tools? And supposedly back then they didn't have any of this modern technology. And when we initially look at the vases, as amazing as they are, with almost mathematical perfect precision, you don't really appreciate it until you start to look at a 3D scan and 3D measurements of the vases themselves. What we're going to be doing is using one of the vases that Uncharted X has used as a case study and cut straight into it without delaying. They found mathematical precision. They found geometrical alignments as well as specific constant choices of dimension ratios that make up circles to do with shapes and curvatures in the vase itself when the shape of the vase is broken down. And coming on to the mathematical equation, the fact is that most of them contain the mathematical equation, the square root of 6/2. Okay, this is something that should blow your mind. We find this equation again and again and again, but we are going to use this vase for example. Let me explain something to you. So for example, there are circles in the vase with a radius of 1.1 mil and a radius of 42 mil. And all these circles have a fixed relationship with each other, which is this equation. This is known as the radial traversal pattern. This is effectively where you choose a center point and then you extend along out evenly between evenly spaced directions, and then from the center you go out in all those directions until every single base is covered. And the best example you can use are the spokes in a bike wheel. Okay, that's the best example that I can think of. In this case, the mathematical equation that we have used is the square root of 6/2. And when you start with one of these circles and multiply this equation by different powers, you get the makeup of the radius of each circle within the vase to microscopic precision. And this is not random. These numbers 6 and 2 and the square root, etc., these are not random. The 6 and the 2 are born from geometry itself. The number 6 comes from hexagonal geometry, the same geometry that underlines equilateral triangles, the flower of life, and countless natural patterns. Some of these patterns include snowflakes and honeycombs, and the thing is it also contains the golden ratio within the hexagon. The 2 comes from symmetry, specifically the act of halving the diagonal. It's the same step you take when you move from a diameter to a radius. And in the vase's construction, every primary radius is derived from halving the fundamental length of the underlying geometric grid. So if you combine the square root of 6 and the division of 2, you get approximately 1.2247, and this becomes the base multiplier for the vase's radii. Raise it to whole number powers and you generate every curve, every bulge, every internal contour. The entire vase unfolds in this ratio. Not only this, but the outside diameter divided by the inside radius of the opening of the vase gives you pi. And where the lip tapers into the vase, you get a new diameter which appears to be the golden ratio when divided by the radius. Something that we have briefly touched on in this video is the flower of life. Now this is where it gets interesting. The flower of life pattern defines the inner dimensions. The angle of the handle defines the center, and the outer dimensions is another flower of life pattern, and that defines the whole handle. In fact, this is so precise you actually need a computer to see how precise it actually is, because words does not give it justice. And researchers have managed to reverse engineer the vase using a CAD model of this vase, and the fit is extraordinary, with deviations of just a few microns. So we are talking microscopic precision when they supposedly didn't have any kind of higher technology, no computer aid to help them back then whatsoever. Now please remember, this is done in granite, and these few deviations are effectively the same as what we get in CNC machined parts. Now coming back to it, granite is harder than steel, and most of the time when we use CNC machines, it is for metal. So now you've got to wonder, how did they manage to do this without a computer model? And this is at least 5,000 years old. How could they have done it without modern technology? If they didn't have CNC machines, or if they didn't have lathes or mills, it does appear that something might be missing in history. And Uncharted X does go on to explain that they have researched multiple other vases, but most of them use this mathematical equation. The thing is, now we have to ask, is this a coincidence? And if it is a coincidence, how did they coincidentally manage to get the same mathematical ratio in every single vase? I don't know what the odds are, but I bet they would be basically mathematically zero. Now at this point, it almost seems ridiculous to suggest that this was done using primitive copper tools when we can clearly see there is no human error involved, as they have been almost machine cut so accurately. As I mentioned before, they are 5 times more accurate than the ones that we have made today in softer stone, of that being marble. And it's the same when we look at things like the schist disc, which shows that the stone has been melted and then bent. And then when we look at some of the 70-ton granite blocks that are so precise. And then we can also look at the Barabar caves, where the granite has been polished so smoothly that it's almost as smooth as glass. Clearly, guys, there is something that is missing in the timeline. And then if we go over to Peru, we see that some of the joins are so precise that you can't even fit a human hair in them. You can see that there's evidence of stone melting, stone bending. And even when we come closer to now, you have the Antikythera mechanism. Again, something is missing from the timeline. And another thing that people do, which I think is quite ridiculous, is that they try to say that they're imitations. But if they're imitations, please answer me this. Why would someone go to all this effort just to make imitations when, if we were just to put our minds to it nowadays, we still cannot make them? And some of these vases have been in private collections for years and years and years. In fact, we're going back to times when we didn't have this kind of technology to make them. So how could they have been imitations from way, way back when we didn't have the technology to even make them? And we have documented evidence that they have been found in burial sites. We have pictures, we have evidence. We have logic to conclude that there is absolutely no way that anyone would go to these lengths just to make imitations. Why would someone, just to make an imitation, make it so that they are just a few microns? You know, the precision is just a few microns. It doesn't make any logical sense. So no, these are not fakes. But, and there is a big but, okay? There's a problem with some of the data. Should we say some of the data has been massaged a little bit, manipulated, might be a better word? Now, in response to these findings, there is a YouTuber called Rethinking. I think he's brilliant. Honestly, he's bang in the middle. He will go for people on the archaeological side, such as Flint Dibble and Mini Miniman, and then he'll come for people who are on the other side, the alternative side, such as Uncharted X and Graham Hancock. He just says what he thinks. He's not interested in making friends. Same here. Essentially, some of the data is missing, but specifically on the lug handles of the vase itself. And we can also see that there is some high deviance on the actual dials, where the dial moves about when we're going around on the granite vase, because Uncharted X very kindly made a video showing some of the deviations and the measurement taking of the granite vase itself. When it comes to the amount of data points that were collected, on one of them we see about 4,200 on one of the handles, this is, and then on the other handle we see about 3,800. So you have to ask yourself, if you want to do a thorough test, why would you not have the same amount of data points per handle? Now, I understand that you do get junk data, but usually it's around 1%, 2% at tops. So the fact that they've taken out 10% for me is a bit worrying. And it's almost as if it's been taken out to try and, so that people don't contest the theory. I think when we have a theory, we need to have both sides of the argument so that we don't get carried away with one side or the complete other side. I think it's very important to try and find some middle ground so that we get the truth. Not your truth, not their truth, but the truth, the cold hard facts. And I feel like for this, there may have been a reason why they have decided to not include some of the data for the lug handles, but who knows? And it's also important to point out that Uncharted X and Christopher Dunn are not the only ones who have done measurements on this vase. In fact, there is a guy called Mark Vist, and when he looked at the lug handles, he did actually say they appeared quite uneven. And it does throw into question again, has the data been manipulated just to make the lug handles look more even than they actually are? And there's no doubt this vase and the handles themselves are magnificent. There's no doubt about this whatsoever. But you do have to ask yourself, are these handles themselves extremely accurate, like CNC accurate, or are they not? And it's not only this, but I do agree sometimes you can get numbers like pi and the golden ratio if you're able to come up with a mathematical equation using numerical data. So let's just say, for example, you've got the game Countdown where you have a certain amount of numbers. In this specific game in Countdown anyway, you're given specific numbers and then you're told to come up with an overall digit. So let's just say we have the number 846, and then you're given the numbers 100, 57, 4, 25, 8 and 10. And then they say come up with 846. I mean, you can do it. You do 8 times 100, which is 800, and then you just do 50 minus 4, which is 846. Add the two together, the 800 and the 46, and you get, as I just said, 846. I mean, you could even do 25 plus 7 plus 4 plus 10 to get 46. And then again, 8 times 100, which is 800, and then you just do 800 plus 46, which is 846. This can happen. Whether it happens or not, like when you look at the pyramids, they say if you times the perimeter of the pyramid by 43,200, you get the circumference of the earth, and the number 43,200 is believed to be a sacred number in geometry. And I don't think you can get this type of accuracy with copper chisels. I do believe you need some kind of mechanical aid, even if it's just sitting on a lathe, because if it sits on a lathe, sometimes it is ever so slightly wobbly, which could explain the handles being the way they are. Now, don't get me wrong, this would push the history of the lathe back from 1300 BC in Egypt all the way back to 5000 plus BC. So these vases do rewrite history, but do they rewrite history in the way that Uncharted X wants them to be rewritten? With the lug handles, because of the way it's been processed, if you use a CNC machine, you would have carved out the vase first, and then you would have had some material around the lug handles themselves, which you would then have to cut out in a separate process. And this means that each handle would have to be cut individually. So if we were to listen to what Ben says, there must have been some kind of numerical coding to get the accurate handles. But then if we listen to debunking, there is no doubt that they are accurate, but we do have to question the entire cutting process, especially of the handles themselves. And also watching Ben's dial indicator jump up and down quite a bit in certain spots. I do just want to touch on this. This could be explained because granite does contain quartz. And it could have been that when they were cutting the granite, a chunk of quartz could have come out. Or just over time it could have been damaged. The thing is that if they had a cutting process where they were able to polish everything so smoothly, you would have thought they would have been able to have polished this bit out. Because don't forget, granite is quite brittle, so a chunk of quartz could just fly out. But me personally, I believe it could be explained by just damage over time. But in conclusion, I could definitely say this, as I literally just mentioned, this does push the dating of the lathe back. There's no question this rewrites history. This pushes the lathe back at least 4,000 years. But do I believe they had an ancient computer? I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe there is a lost type of technology of which they were able to encode numerical data to create the vase. I know this sounds like CNC machining, but if you see a CNC machine, you have a big machine, and then on CAD design, you then transfer the numerical coding onto it, and then it cuts it for you. I'm not too sure if it was able to be done like that, but who knows? I also do believe they had mathematical knowledge that wasn't supposed to have been invented or discovered until the Greeks. I mean, if you believe maths is discovered or invented, you decide that for yourself. I believe maths is discovered, but that's not the point of this video. And I believe these vases had a purpose. If you look at some of them, they spin perfectly on a flat surface. Some of them are so thin. Clearly, it must have been very, very stable when you were cutting, and very thorough when you're cutting granite this thin, because it can just easily break. But the only problem I have is that the data has been manipulated around the lug handles, and I want to know where the rest of the data is. And if Mark is correct, then we need the rest of the data to disprove him. Because currently at this moment, it looks like when it comes to the lug handles, he is correct. But the thing is, even if the lug handles aren't even, we need to start asking questions about how the flower of life and how this mathematical equation has got into the vase itself. How far back does mathematical knowledge and expert craftsmanship in hard material go? I think there's a type of technology that we today wouldn't need to use or understand. But guys, I need you to let me know what you think. This is the end of the video. Thank you for staying around. Really quickly, if you have noticed this, I've had surgery on my lip, and this is a stitch that is coming out. So it's not a bit of rotten food. It's just a dodgy stitch. Anyway, thanks for sticking around, and don't forget to comment, like, share and subscribe. Thank you for watching.